Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It is Tuesday. We have another author interview. I hope you had a nice 4th of July weekend. I hope that you were able to do something fun, but also stay safe. Stay safe in terms of both fireworks and the coronavirus. It was a whole complicated way of staying, or, mess of staying safe this year. So we stayed home pretty much. I could hear fireworks in our neighborhood. I had a friend who sent me the fireworks display she could see from her yard, which was as close as I got to actual fireworks, seeing fireworks. So I could hear them in my neighborhood and I could see them on Snapchat when she sent them to me. And that was okay with me. Like I said, we stayed home. I picked a bunch of peaches from the fruit tree in our backyard. Pretty sure that's what I said I did last weekend, right? Yeah. Anyway, I picked a bunch of peaches, dried them, made fruit leather out of them. Very exciting. I felt very domestic. I made some cookies. So it was a good day. I didn't mind staying home. But for me, growing up, we always had a family reunion on Flathead Lake every year. My mom's aunt, my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, and her husband bought a small island on Flathead Lake a very, very, very long time ago, and they started having family reunions there every year. My great grandmother was one of 9 or 10 children. I think it was 10. And so it was all of their kids and grandkids and everyone that came to this reunion. And it's changed a lot over the years, but this is how I learned all about first cousins, second cousins once removed, second cousins twice removed. I learned about all of those generational titles and connections. And since we did that every year growing up, even though I haven't been there for many, many years now, it's been 10 years since I went last, and before that it had been probably 10 years since I'd been able to go. The 4th of July, just anything else isn't quite the same to me. It could be a really cool gathering and I can have fun, but it's just not quite the same as being on the island surrounded by second cousins, third cousins, whatever number of cousins. I don't actually have any first cousins on that side of the family. And I only have 4 on my dad's side, so I have very few first cousins, unlike my husband who has hundreds of first cousins. He doesn't even know them all. I am sort of rambling, but just reminiscing about the 4th of July, and now we'll move on to talking about books. But at any rate, I hope you had a nice weekend. So, author interview. This week I am speaking with author Kathrin Hutson about her Blue Helix series. It is young adult science fiction, dystopian, LGBTQ+, all kinds of good stuff. The first in the series is called Sleepwater Beat. They say the pen is mightier than the sword. In Sleepwater's world, words are literally more powerful than bullets. Leo could always make people believe anything she says. Really believe. When her chest burns and the words come from her mouth, her target's eyes glaze over. They forget their own thoughts, and they'll do anything she says. It's what keeps her alive after being on the run and living on the streets for years. But after using it on her girlfriend and her dad's drug dealer, it's also what got her here on the streets in the first place. Then Sleepwater finds her. When Leo discovers there are others out there with similar powers scattered across the country, she can't say no to the underground organization. After all, what's a little sit down with the only people who may ever understand her? What she doesn't expect is to be thrust into Sleepwater's guerrilla war, hunted by government agencies, and used as a weapon. Worse than that, she might be more valuable not for what she can do, but for who she was before they found her. That is the description of Sleepwater Beat, the first in the Blue Helix series. Again, the author is Kathrin Hutson. There is so much obviously going on in this book. I mean, there's, I always say there's layers because there are lots of layers in most of the books that we read in everyday life. But it's got that hero's journey. You get this sort of unlikely hero in Leo. She's homeless, been living on the streets. She does have this power, but then she meets this group of people and she gets involved for the first time in a long time. She gets involved. She starts caring about people. And that's usually what happens in books like this, right? Something happens, and the person, unlikely as they may seem, gets involved in something bigger than themselves, and they start working toward some kind of common goal. And usually it's, in this case, it's a dystopian society, and they're trying to fight back against powers that would use their abilities as weapons, use their abilities or take their abilities, try to control their abilities, etc. Of course, I don't want to give too much away, so let's go ahead and turn now to the interview with Kathrin, and she can tell you a little bit more about this series. Kathrin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm happy to be here.
I am very happy to have you here. We're going to talk about your Blue Helix series. There are currently 2 in that series. Before we get to those books, though, if you could share a bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Of course. My name is Kathrin Hutson. I write dark fiction across the board. That's primarily dark fantasy and dystopian sci-fi, and I'll soon be branching into some dark urban fantasy as well. And writing is my full-time 9 to 5. I say 9 to 5, but it's more like 5 to 5. I also ghostwrite fiction, and that put together with writing my own books is something that I'm fortunate enough to be able to say that I do full time. That's all I do. That is the day job. So this is super exciting for me. It's super fun, and yeah, there's a summary.
In the foreword for one of your books, you mentioned that you do have a child. Do you write with the kiddo at home with you, or do you try to make some separation?
Well, my husband is a stay-at-home dad, so she gets to be with him all the time while I'm working, which is great. She was in preschool, in the time before. And yeah. But no, I get to see her during the day. I come out for lunch, and but luckily she's got her dad with her all day, and she may go back to preschool soon, depending on what happens. I don't know, but I'm pretty much shut in my office all day.
All right. So as I said, the series is called the Blue Helix series. The first one in it is called Sleepwater Beat. So can you give an overview of that first book?
Yes, Sleepwater Beat. So this is LGBTQ dystopian sci-fi. The entire Blue Helix series very closely reflects, I guess, our current times, which is not my intention either time I wrote either book, but so the storyline follows a group of characters, people who have developed a sort of a supernatural ability, and basically with the power of storytelling, which elicits physical responses, and people who hear these beat spinners speak with a certain type of word. So I call it spinning a beat. Their superpower, I suppose, is a beat. And this entire series for me was, first of all, it's just a super fun story, and I wanted to take the phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword, and flip it on its head and see what actually happens when, words are actually more powerful than physical weapons or actions. And so Sleepwater Beat follows Leo Tiefler, the main character, and she's come up in a rough way. She had a really rough childhood, and she gets found by this organization called Sleepwater. All these people who have this beat spinning ability, just like her. And I'm not sure how much I should go into this book specifically. I wrote this series wanting to highlight marginalized communities through the lens of using Sleepwater, the people with disability, as a way to make these kinds of conversations more accessible across the board to people who might otherwise would not understand or want to discuss or consider these conversations, I suppose. And so in Sleepwater Beat, I dove into marginalized communities like LGBTQ people and drug addicts and drug survivors and people in broken homes and people living sort of on the fringes of society, kind of black market stuff. And that was so much fun. Sleepwater Beat was such a fun book to write. I thought it would just be a standalone, and then it turned out that it's a series to read.
Yeah, it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, and I won't give anything away. But it could have ended there, as you mentioned in your forward for the second book. But it doesn't end there, which is nice because you get more of the story. Then there's a lot to say about the first book. I mean, it's sci-fi. It's a bit dark urban fantasy. You've got the main character who is LGBTQ plus. She's homeless in the beginning. There's just a lot of different layers going on in this book. So what was your original inspiration for the story, do you think?
The original inspiration was, honestly, it was just a scene that I had of Leo and Carl, and the scene never made it into the novel, and I'm glad it didn't. It didn't belong. And then I had written sort of an experimental short story. I wanted to see what would happen if I twisted all the different scenes and put them into non-chronological order, and I wondered if I could tell a full story that way. The story itself in that short story was complete, but I had workshopped the short story with the writers group when I lived in South Carolina, and they got me so excited with how much more they wanted to see of this world that I ended up writing, turning 30,000 words into 100,000. That, yeah, it was quite a bit of work. But then, the majority of the inspiration from then on, I think, just came from my own life and my own experiences. And Leo is the first, probably so far, the only character I've written who has been so much like me and has drawn so much from my own life and my own experiences, and from who, probably not who I am on the outside, but who I feel like on the inside. And I followed, I wrote the story the way it felt right to be written. And when I hit certain turns in the past, it just flowed so effortlessly because it seemed like the next thing that would work for Leo was something that I had also had direct experience with myself. So it just kind of funneled everything I knew into her, and it seemed to have worked out pretty well.
Well, yeah, it did, because it actually became an international bestseller, and it's an award-winning science fiction finalist, in the 2019 International Book Awards. So that's very cool. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We are going to take our first break of the podcast, but when we come back, Kathrin and I will be speaking more about Leo, the main character. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking this week with Kathrin Hutson about her Blue Helix series. We are currently talking about the first book in the series called Sleepwater Beat. Let's go ahead and return to that interview. Let's talk a little bit more about the main character, Leo. What about her do you think will resonate with readers?
She is, there's a lot about her that makes her a little prickly and maybe frustrating in a lot of ways. She has a tendency to just run away from things, or run away and or be violent. But I think what readers will resonate the most with when it comes down to Leo is the fact that really deep down underneath all the grittiness, she's just looking for a place to belong. She just wants to find, a family. She never really had a good one to begin with. She wants to find a place where she belongs and people who she can be herself around without questioning their motives. And that's, that's something that we all are looking for, right? Or perhaps we have found it if we're lucky enough. And so I think through all of her struggles and the crazy things that she gets herself into, that is probably one of her best qualities, is that she's looking for a sense of self and for a sense of community, even in some really crazy places.
And yeah, she does find that in kind of an interesting way, because at the beginning of the book, she meets a man named Carl and very quickly decides to just trust him and go with him, which I was like, stop it. But they develop a relationship and a friendship, and then he introduces her to other people who are like her, and that they can spin these beats, that they can tell these stories with their words. And of course, things go from there. It's never as easy as it seems. Can you talk a little bit about Carl and Leo's relationship, and then how that grows into the bigger relationships within Sleepwater?
Absolutely. It's really interesting, actually. When I first wrote that short story I was talking about, I had scenes in there where Carl and Leo had or were developing some kind of romantic relationship, and it just didn't work. It didn't fit. It was like, trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. And so then I started from the very beginning, from when they first met, and that worked a lot better. I would say Carl is more or less like a big brother figure to Leo, and he has in a lot of ways been where she is and has been when they meet. And Leo is Carl's chance for redemption, so to speak. I won't say what. I don't want to spoil anything. But when he finds her, he knows exactly what she can do. He knows exactly how lost she is, and that she has no idea about other people in the world with disability. And he wants to take her in and show her what can be done, introduce her to these people, and also he's trying to, I guess, pay it forward when other characters who are a part of Sleepwater did the same for him when they found him and he was lost. And that's one of the messages that it's I hope it doesn't get lost beneath all the other different threads that are happening throughout the series. But one of the messages that I did want to get across, which is a little more hopeful than what I normally put into my fiction, is that in the intentions behind our actions and the small acts of kindness that we perform for people, whether it's once or twice or for months, they have a huge ripple effect. And so Carl leads Leo sort of through this maze of figuring out what Sleepwater is, what all these people who have the beat can do, how she fits into this much larger picture on a worldwide scale of what's happening to these people all over the world. And then, showing her that she can find a place in there as well. And which is one of the reasons why Sleepwater Beat could have ended on its own, and it was successfully, I think, satisfying for readers before I decided to turn this into the series, is because at the end of the book, Leo has come full circle to this place where now she is the person who knows what Sleepwater is and what's happening, and she's paying it forward again by bringing someone else under her wing. So Carl and Leo's relationship is complicated, and they do end up caring for each other quite a bit, even though they get into a lot of arguments. But yeah, I don't want to say any more than that. I don't want to more spoilers. There's a lot.
I know it's so hard to talk about books like this because there's so much going on that you're like, I can't talk about that. So let's move away from the plot a little bit and talk about how much research you did for the series.
Yes, I did so much research for the series, and for Sleepwater Beat, for some reason, it seemed a lot more difficult. I'm not a fan of research in any way whatsoever. When I feel that in writing science fiction, and definitely dystopian as well, it's so important to do research and to get things accurate, to have accurate facts or reflections, in these stories, even though it is fiction. And so, let's see, with Sleepwater Beat, I actually ended up doing a lot of research on electromagnetic pulses, and never actually used it. So I had to change the way I do research after that because it wasted so much time.
Well, maybe you can use it in a future book.
Right. It could, it is possible for sure. It just didn't have a place in Sleepwater Beat. But I did a lot of research about certain areas of the country and mapping is one of the banes of my existence when it comes to writing any story that moves across like a large geographical area. So Sleepwater is going back and forth across the country, and I had to keep all of my states straight and all of the driving times, and it was just insane. I also researched how radio stations are named because I made up my own radio station and found out that picked my favorite places among the agricultural states of the U.S. to the place Sleepwater being formed in Illinois and whatnot. But most of the research for Sleepwater Beat was that kind of stuff, and I really just despise it, but it has to be done, so I did it anyway. And then for Sleepwater Static, I did a lot of research. It was more historical stuff. There's a lot of Black history in Sleepwater Static, and which I used quite a bit of in the little interludes and the pen pal letters between characters. And then, just I was writing from a timeline 1979 to 2031. So there was a lot of stuff there that I had to get correct too in terms of historical accuracy, just in these little blips of time where I was in the past. And that's something I'd never done before, but maybe it was because of my experience in the last year and a half that it took me to write these. But the research didn't seem nearly as awful for the second book. I don't know. I'm not sure what the reason for that is. I still hate it.
Well, maybe you're going to respect.
What was that? I'm sorry, cut out.
You're going to respect research for your relationship.
I'm so sorry, Sarah. You're suddenly cutting out. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm connected to everything. Oh, I still can't
is that better?
hear you. That is much better, yes. No,
okay.
We're good now.
Let's try this. Okay, let's try this.
Sorry.
No, I think it was me.
Okay.
I was just saying that maybe your relationship with research is evolving.
Yes, it has to. So I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. I have to evolve, absolutely.
I seriously love Kathrin's laugh. It makes me smile every time she laughs. So, hey, that's not a bad way to spend part of your weekend, is talking to an author and giggling some. So we're going to go ahead and take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about the second book of the series. It's called Sleepwater Static. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Kathrin Hutson about her Blue Helix series. We've talked about the first book, which is called Sleepwater Beat, and now we're going to move on to talking about the second book, Sleepwater Static. Let me read you the description of this one. They say home is where the heart is. Now that Sleepwater's on the run, home is just another place to hide. Wyoming's Sleepwater chapter is on the run, hunted for their ability to spin a beat. With little time to mourn the members they've lost, Bernadette Manny takes the group to the one place she swore she'd never see again, the cabin in Hollywood, South Carolina. It's remote enough to lay low and catch a break, but not for long. Their beats are condemned as mutations, radical terrorist tactics, and felonies punishable both by and outside the law. Bernadette thought Sleepwater would be safe here, but returning to her southern roots unleashes more demons than she left behind. Her past, her love, and even her own flesh and blood won't let her move on through a venomous society intent on rooting out her people. Now, to bring a mother's first child safely into an unsafe world, Bernadette must face her own shame from before Sleepwater itself was born. But redemption and forgiveness may be too much to ask, and it may just be too late. So that is the description of the second book, Sleepwater Static. Let's go ahead now and return to the interview with Kathrin Hutson. Yes. Now, the second book is Sleepwater Static, and again, this is always tricky to talk about two books in a series because you don't want to give too much away from the first book by talking about the second book, but we can say that whereas the first book is from Leo's perspective, a young woman, then the second book is told more from the perspective of a character from the first book, Bernadette, and she is an older woman, and there's an interracial relationship. So whereas in Leo's book we get that lens of the LGBTQ community, now we're getting, a lens of an interracial relationship, but all, of course, still in this setting of the world as it is in this dystopian setting. You could, without giving too much away, if you could talk about the second book a little bit.
Of course. So Sleepwater Static was actually, and I do talk about this in the author's note at the beginning of the book, that I had realized after writing Sleepwater Beat that I had focused on all these marginalized communities, and try to use Sleepwater as a new marginalized group facing discrimination, to highlight the disparity there. And I had never really written or mentioned or done anything with race, and that was super important to me. And so I was a little horrified when I had that realization, like, how could I have left that out? But then it was the perfect opportunity for me to write the second book in the series that had a whole cast of people of color characters, which was so much fun. And then I chose to write the main character as Bernadette Manny, who, as you said, she's a 71-year-old woman, and she has arthritis, and she has sort of fallen into this role of leading the chapter of Sleepwater, the group that Leo was with in the first book, leading them sort of across the country to whatever semblance of safety they can find as they're being hunted down and chased out of wherever they end up. And so I wanted to, it was so much fun to explore writing from Bernadette's perspective, and I found that I have a lot more in common with the 71-year-old woman than I would have thought. A lot of it, I think that comes down to a lot of similar experiences that I have with her as well. I don't know what it's like to age as far as into my 70s, but I do know what it's like to age and to be a mother, and to go through a few of the things that she's gone through. And I have lived in the South, so this whole book takes place mostly in South Carolina, definitely in the South. It was, I did also funnel some of myself into Bernadette, like I said, and I just wanted to touch on her character because she fascinated me when I wrote Sleepwater Beat, and I wanted to explore her some more. And it had been my plan to write each book in the series from the perspective of a different minor character in the preceding book. So book 3 will definitely be from the perspective of a different character as well, while continuing the overall story. Sleepwater Static it was really important to me to do it right, I guess, because there are a lot of nuances and subtleties when writing about, especially when writing about race, I think, and discrimination. And as a white female author, how far can I go in writing about these things without perpetuating harmful stereotypes and, crossing a line experientially, I think. And so it was the best way for me to do that, I thought, was to write from Bernadette's point of view. And I think it went well. I used some sensitivity readers for this book, and I got fantastic feedback on that, which was great. So I, pounded my head against the wall unnecessarily for many, many nights trying to do this right and with respect and with, sensitivity to the way that things could be portrayed. So far it seems like it's done relatively well. It also became an international bestseller just shortly after its release. With writing dystopian sci-fi, I guess I picked the perfect or maybe imperfect time to write in a sort of parallel universe like this. Sleepwater Static came out. It released the week that the George Floyd protests started in the U.S. So that was also a really interesting reflection to see, and that aspect specifically made me really grateful that I had chosen to write about these things, and that the world is opening up to talking about them and seeing them, and it was kind of a surreal experience. But we follow Bernadette's story from when she was young up until sort of when Leo comes back into the picture at the end. I guess that's kind of a spoiler, but not really. And Bernadette is almost just as badass of a character as Leo is in her own way, in her old age, in her she doesn't take crap from anybody, that's for sure. And the second book is definitely a lot more low key than Sleepwater Beat, and there's not as much action. But I have heard from readers that it's still just as intense and as suspenseful, and gets across the same emotional depth as the first book, which is always what I think every writer wants to do when they have a sequel. Hopefully it's as good as the first one, if not better, right?
Right.
There you have it.
Well, and it's really interesting because I think we often forget that books are a process, and so it's not like you just wrote it last week and it came out and oh wow, right, suddenly it's so very timely. No, right, you wrote it and then it had to go through edits and it had to go through all of these things, and so the fact that it did come out now is really fascinating because of obviously there's a lot. The world has gone crazy a little bit.
Yeah.
And you probably didn't set out to write a book about a world that's gone crazy. Well, I mean, you did, but not to reflect the world that we currently are living in.
Not now. That's true. That's very true.
Right. But yeah, I guess my main point is that it's just it's very timely, even though you didn't plan it to be.
Yes, and thank you. I'm very grateful for that. Same thing happened with Sleepwater Beat as well, and so it just, I guess I'm onto something. Just keep going.
Yeah.
With it.
Have you had any reaction from readers? Because it's a young adult book. Is that correct?
No.
The first, or would you not consider it?
I wouldn't consider it young adult, but I have heard from readers and book groups actually that they would offer these books to teens they have a read. So I haven't been categorizing it as young adult.
Okay. I mean, Leo is younger, and we do read in flashbacks about her younger days, her teen years. So I'm just curious if you've had comments or feedback from, because unfortunately representation is still lacking in terms of LGBTQ characters. So have you had feedback from like teenagers or young adults, or early adults about seeing themselves reflected in this book?
I have only had a handful of readers in that age range talk to me about having read these books, and they honestly weren't very in-depth discussions, but it was a lot of hey, this is very cool, and they appreciated seeing that in a way that I think also, adult readers who wanted to see more representation, like I do, which is part of why I wrote this, is that, there's an appreciation for the fact that Leo's queerness, or the queerness of any of the other characters in these books, are not highlighted as, the main theme or the driving force behind the characters. They're just woven into the characters as part of who they are, just as if someone had brown hair or wore, Converse every day. So that so far has been the only thing that I've heard from younger readers, and it's only been 3 or 4, but I have had adult readers say the same thing as well, which I also appreciate, and that is the kind of representation for LGBTQ plus characters in speculative fiction, speculative fiction specifically, that I wanted to see as well. There wasn't, the queerness being the, neon sign above the entire thing. It's just part of the character, part of the story, but it doesn't drive the story, But the story would be completely different if these characters, changed at all in that way. But yeah.
Well, and I think that's important. I mean, many people listening will just be like, yeah, of course you would write it that way. Whereas others might be thinking, oh my gosh, how can I read a book about someone who's so dissimilar from me? Well, it's just part of the character. And I think that's really important, to just write a book like you would write any other book. But the characters do what they do. You didn't make it like, hello, this main character is XYZ. Whatever. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was very important for me to do, because I love seeing new work come out where that is done, and I still feel like there's not enough of it with any kind of marginalized representation. Great. So this is just one that I felt strongly about as well.
Yeah. And as a woman who is in an interracial marriage, it's nice to have that relationship reflected in a book as well.
Oh, I am not, actually. My husband is.
No, I am.
Oh,
I am.
Oh, you are. Oh, you're speaking for yourself. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No problem.
I'm so glad to hear that. I do love that. That's wonderful.
Okay, time for one more break. When we come back, we will be talking about why this series made my lungs hurt. You'll have to tune in to find out what the heck I'm talking about. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast. Time to hashtag everything. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media, from Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, we were talking about the second book of the series, Sleepwater Static, and the relationship in that book between Daryl and the main character, Bernadette. So let's go ahead and return now to the interview.
Yeah. Now I have one comment that's kind of an aside, but reading the first book made my lungs hurt. Oh my gosh, there's so much smoking in the first book. Was that intentional?
Yes, it was intentional. It was so. I used to smoke. I do not anymore. And I think that part of me still romanticizes the act of smoking, and when I was smoking, it was as much as these characters, if not more. So I'm actually very fortunate to still be as healthy as I am, which is fairly healthy. And it was part of driving home, in my mind, the sort of noir feeling of the first book. And then also it was subtle, and I know that some readers have picked up on it, but more towards the end, Leo stops smoking as much as she does in the beginning, and she starts to get grossed out by it a little bit, and things change and morph around, but that was, it was intentional. They had a reader once tell me that I had gone way too far in writing about smoking, and that I'd crossed the line of cigarette etiquette, which I thought was interesting. But I guess it got across a very visceral picture.
Yeah. I didn't know that there was. I didn't know that there was a cigarette etiquette in terms of writing. This is new to me.
I didn't think so either. But, it was definitely interesting, and I don't know. I think writing about some of these more difficult topics and experiences that were tough for me to handle in my own personal life. When I was going through the roughest parts of my life, I was really smoking a lot. I was up to about 3 packs a day at one point, which is inconceivable to me now. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of coupling that hardness with all the cigarettes. And put them hand in hand, I guess.
Now, you did mention a third book, so the series is continuing. Is that what you're working on now, or are you finished with that and working on something else?
I am not finished with that one. I'm still formulating the trajectory of the third story, which is usually what I do with my own work. I think about it for as long as I possibly can until I force myself to sit down and write it. But I do know where it's going, and I do know which main character is taking the forefront in the third book. And right now, I am so close to finishing up the first book in a brand new dark urban fantasy series that I am so excited for to see how my readers enjoy that, because it's something I've never done before with my own fiction. So I'm looking forward to seeing how people enjoy a new genre from me, and that's the I guess closest deadline focus that I have right now. And then I also have a very, very, very darker than anything I think I have written to date, LGBTQ fantasy, dark fantasy. And that should be out around November as well. So, and that one's just fun for me because I get to go back into this super dark fantasy, and it's just so much more than anything I've ever done, and it's incredible. I'm really excited about, it just opens with violence and blood everywhere, so it's really great.
You're so excited. What do you think? What do you think draws you to writing dark fantasy?
Oh, I've always had an attraction to morally gray characters and I guess violent storylines, violent characters, and the grittiness of hope is lost, but like for real, until maybe a spark of hope comes back. And for me now, personally, in my own life, I started reading dark fantasy when I was 10 at least, and for me personally now, writing it is very much a way that I have come to compartmentalize the aspects of myself that are far too dark to entertain in my real life. So I can maintain this life that I am fortunate enough to have, with my family and, happy days and abundance and joy, by keeping all the darkness somewhere else, and that somewhere else is in my fiction. I guess people get a little surprised when they either read my stuff and then hear me speak afterwards, or vice versa. But it's the same person.
That's funny. I'm just picturing you reading dark fantasy to your preschooler.
Yeah, well,
kind of Addams Family-esque.
Yeah, a little bit. She loves it.
Are there any of your other novels that are out that you would like to highlight?
Oh, there are 5 others. This one's a dark fantasy as well. It's children duology, and that is The Jungle Book meets Kill Bill with Dragons. That was my first dark fantasy series. It was duology, just the 2 books. And then the Unclaimed trilogy, I actually released all 3 books in 2018, which was crazy. And those are very fun. Those are probably the lightest read that I have out right now. And this very super, super, super dark LGBTQ dark fantasy that we'll be having out by the end of the year is in the same universe as the Unclaimed trilogy. So I guess readers will get to see the sort of lighter, more playful side, and then dive deep into the darkness in the same world, which will be really fun. Those are my other books in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. And writing is your full-time job. Is it something that you've always wanted to do, or something that you came to at a different point in your life?
Yes, it's. I have wanted to write full-time since I was 10, which is when I started writing, and when I realized that this was something I could actually do, that writing was a thing. We can make up our own stories to do whatever we want. And so, I followed that trajectory, and I was in the creative writing fiction program at CU Boulder. Went there. Oh, yeah. And so I followed the trail of wanting to do this professionally. And that trail got bumpy and went in a bunch of different directions. And I it's a sign that I ended up in the place I wanted to be anyway. So I've been writing full time for the last 18 months now, and I feel like I'm living the dream. It's just really fun, and hopefully I'll be able to spend some more time writing my own books as well. The ghostwriting takes a little bit of priority at this time, but that's okay. It's fun too, and I've learned so much doing it, which is fantastic.
Thank you. From your own experience, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Yes, what I tell aspiring authors, I think to me was the most important thing, is to just keep writing, no matter what it is or how you feel about it or what it feels like, or whether or not you think you can write the book that you want to write. Just do it. Just keep writing. And that is, writing is like a muscle, like any other muscle of the body, like any other, training with exercise and building muscle, building stamina. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And I will say there's plenty of stuff I've written that is not worth ever mentioning beyond saying this. Just keep going is the most important thing. And then beyond that, I would say find some writing friends, or even people who love to just read stuff, and work together and get other people's opinions about your stories too. And it's always it's important to grow thick skin, but I think it's always been so much fun and such an important thing for me to have, this select few alpha readers or beta readers who will go through everything I write and be completely 100% honest with me, which is always necessary. That would be my best advice.
Okay. And when you take the time to read for yourself, who are your favorite authors?
It's a long list. All-time favorite is Stephen King, specifically with his Dark Tower series. But I also really, really love Jacqueline Carey and William Gibson on the sci-fi side. John Irving, George R.R. Martin, Diana Gabaldon with the Outlander series, and I'll stop there.
I've been reading the Outlander series since high school. I want to smack her some days.
Well, yeah, right. But
because it was supposed to be 5 books, and then it was supposed to be 6 books, and I'm like, it's never going to end. I need closure.
I know, really. And the last book was left off. It's, you can't do that.
Yeah. So
yes, but it's fantastic.
I know you have a website, so give us the website and where people maybe can interact with you on social media.
Of course. My website is KathrinHutsonFiction.com, and those are my handles for Facebook, my Facebook page, and my Instagram page as well, Kathrin Hutson Fiction. And I'm on Twitter as Exquisitely Dark. I'm the most active on Facebook just because it feels easier to me, but I am everywhere, and I do have a newsletter where I put in some fun extra things that, the vast majority of people can't see, but I'm available everywhere, so you can find me there.
All right. Thank you. We've talked about quite a few things, but is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would really like to bring up at this point?
I don't think so. This has covered a good bit. I feel good about it.
All right. Good. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule, especially on this holiday weekend, to talk to me about your book. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. This is good to be here.
Thank you again to Kathrin for joining me to talk about her Blue Helix series, Sleepwater Beat, Sleepwater Static. I am looking forward to the next installment or installments to see where the story takes us and what we can learn about some of those secondary characters who will become main characters. I love when that happens in books. And I also love reading books or series like this where you get different perspectives and see the story from different points of view, because you learn about characters in ways that you wouldn't normally learn about them when it's just from the same point of view throughout the series. So I always find that fun. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. Hope you're having a wonderful week. If you like this podcast and have not done so already, please do give us a nice review. Give us a 5-star rating. Give us a nice written review, whatever floats your boat this week. They really do help us to get this podcast out to more people. So please do that if you have not already done so. And also, if you aren't already doing so, please follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Interact with us and us. I always say us as though I don't know, is it the royal we? Interact with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Talk to me about what you're reading. Talk to me about what you want to read next. Talk to me about any of the books that I have talked to authors about, especially if you have read them, and what you thought of those books. I love to hear from listeners. So that's it for this episode. Join me again on Friday for yet another episode of the GSMC Book Review Podcast. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your week and take plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmc.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.